Jane Sutherland was one of the leading women artists in Melbourne in the late 19th century. She was also a colleague of the Australian Impressionist artists Tom Roberts, Frederick McCubbin and the others who went out into the landscape painting fresh impressions of what they saw and found on the outskirts of Melbourne. She was equal to her companions, but of course her oeuvre was quite small. She painted only for a very short period of time. She was an artist who was born in New York. Her family came from Scotland. They had spent some time in the US. Then they went back to Scotland and then eventually came to Australia. The Sutherland family were quite a clan because two of the brothers of Jane Sutherland's father also came to Melbourne, and soon they became absolutely part of the burgeoning story, if you like, of culture and the academic world in Melbourne. She went to the National Gallery School, where she started attending the drawing class in 1871. She eventually started to teach art, and she had solo exhibitions. She, by 1888, had taken a studio in the famous Grosvenor Chambers, which was located in Collins Street, and it was there that Tom Roberts had a studio, Streeton spent a little time there in the studio, and a number of other artists had studios there, so she was in the midst of this very interesting milieu of artists working in Melbourne. As a painter, as a woman painter, she certainly couldn't go out to the artist's camp and stay overnight, as obviously Tom Roberts and Streeton and McCubbin and eventually Conda did, but she certainly accompanied that group on day trips. And her sketches and her watercolours attest to an artist whose observation of the landscape is both a mix of actuality, of real observance, but also the power of her own imagination and work back in the studio. Her subject matter is quite unique to her. She focused largely on women in the landscape, women working, picking bracken, looking for mushrooms, and her other favourite topic was children. Now, Jane Sutherland never married, but she had a lot of nieces and nephews, and in one of the key paintings in the NGV's collection, Field Naturalists, a painting that depicts 3 young children playing in the mud in a wonderful wintry setting. This work really depicted her own nephews and nieces. The title Field Naturalists comes from the fact that Jane Sutherland herself had been a member of the Field Naturalists Club, which had started in 1880. The aspiration of the Field Naturalists Club was to engage with the landscape and to cultivate a love of nature in the people of Victoria. So her work is quite extraordinary, but it is limited in terms of its numbers because, quite sadly, Jane Sutherland's career was relatively short. By 1911, she had ceased painting oils and was painting only watercolours, and she becomes almost an invalid before her death in 1928. But she left behind a wonderful group of paintings, and they're works that really, as one critic of her time described them, they're works that are absolutely thoroughly Australian.